Hey folks, it's Rob Flux here with another Sunday session, and today we're going to be talking all about exiting your land through, I guess, the land subdivision process, and how do you actually sell your land, both in good and bad times, and some of the challenges you need to think about in doing that, because selling a land is not quite the same as selling a house. You can't touch it, feel it, smell it. Nobody's actually walking through it when you do a home open. It's just grass, folks. So how the hell do we sell that stuff? Now, in order to do that, we're going to talk to a very long-term friend of mine, Morgan Lewis from BE Property. Morgan, welcome, mate. How are you?
Afternoon, Rob. Very well, thank you. And afternoon to everyone watching today.
Thank you, mate. We go quite a way back. So for those who've been following my journey, they know that this started a long time ago, about 11 years ago, with 5 mates around my kitchen table. You came in probably into my world about a year and a half in, I think. So we were very, very small fry at that point in time. So now at that point you were called Built Easy. So mate, so firstly, who is BE Property, and what was the Built Easy history, and how and where do you come to, and why are we listening to you as the experts here?
That's right, Rob. I still remember the Chalk Hotel back in those days. So yeah, it's certainly come a long way. The network is great to see it growing week on week. So we used to be called Built Easy, and where we started was effectively we were working on the buyer side when it comes to purchasing land. So we were the person that was helping someone find some land, identify a suitable builder for that land, and take them through that building process. In particularly on blocks that were sort of more in your infill location, so places where has the potential for a lot more constraints on that land, which would introduce some more uncertainty and difficulty into the building process. So we were doing that for a number of years, and we also were working in what's called an aggregation space, so acting as a conduit between a land developer, a builder, and someone typically called like a property marketer or a sales group, we can refer them to, that has an end buyer that would be interested in purchasing a house and land package. What we found through that process was that we gained a lot of experience around the different challenges and the nature of selling land and the stakeholders that are interested in land, which isn't always the person that's going on the contract and buying the land. And we found in a lot of cases, the representation or sales representation for the developer, i.e. the real estate agent, just didn't carry that same expertise, and that process could be done a lot more effectively. So then we moved into acting as the sales specialist, so the specialist real estate agent for developers that in particular are doing more boutique subdivisions, so anything from a single lot up to about 50 lot size subdivisions, largely in southeast Queensland, so Brisbane, Redlands, Moreton, parts of Ipswich, Logan. Now, in that time, a lot has happened with pricing as well. So where we started, for instance, you could buy a house and land package in Salisbury for 650,000 or a double story for about 700,000. That's a first home buyer market. And Built Easy was about making that building process easy for the buyers. Now, you're pretty much paying that just for the block of land. So we're talking.
So I've got a project in Salisbury right now, mate.
Sorry, just didn't catch that one, Rob.
I said I'm hoping so. I've got a project in Salisbury right now.
Yes, yeah. So more or less, yeah, it's not first home buyer territory anymore, unless they're very well off first home buyers.
Yeah.
And we're dealing with properties that we want to have a premium image. We're obviously trying to maximize the sales price for the developers. So the logical step was just to change a bit of our branding and our name from Built Easy to BE Property.
Yeah. So flip to the fence, mate. So instead of representing the buyer, you're now representing the developer who's actually selling the land. And instead of trying to squeeze the developer and I guess get a bargain out of the process, you're now representing the developer because you understand the buyers a hell of a lot better than I guess a typical real estate agent was able to, because you knew their issues, challenges, and constraints. So, mate, in selling a block of land, like people think it's just put it out on a website and try to get rid of it, but you're going through a lot of different I guess in the industry, it's called channels, right? So a lot of different channels to actually get rid of the stock. So give us some insights into some of the different ways that you actually get the message out to market that are off market that a lot of people wouldn't actually see, as opposed to just the online portals that everyone's used to.
Yep. So I want to differentiate between the end buyer and what we call a sales channel or intermediary. And there are a lot of people in this marketplace. So some examples could be builders, building brokers, investment sales agents, accountants, financial planners. So stakeholders that have clients that are looking for a particular solution that involves land. So land, you need to think of land as an input. It's input into a certain product, and that product is for a particular buyer. So, example could be just a simple house and land package at a certain budget with a certain yield. So it might be 650,000 total package with a 4% yield in a growth corridor. That is a particular product, let's say, that's going to meet the needs of a particular investor. Or you might have rooming accommodation, which is quite specific to Brisbane, but there are other products, so yield products, so something that produces, say, 5.5% or 8% yield. So duplexes, co-living, different things that you'll find across the nation, but they're more or less equivalent. And there's people that specialize in that space. So marketing groups that specialize in attracting clients. It generally starts with the finance. So they qualify people on what their borrowing capacity is. They qualify people on a particular strategy that they're trying to execute, generally around some kind of wealth creation, bigger picture wealth creation strategy. And once they've pre-qualified that client, then they're looking for a stock input. So a lot of those people come to either someone like us or someone like a builder. So there's a lot of builders that aren't retail facing that build several hundred of homes a year, just in Queensland alone, but you have them across the nation. And all of those are sold in an off-market space. So in this time, in 8 years we've been going, we've built up a network of a database of all of these different contacts, and that's a large. We would probably do in a typical market. So COVID was atypical, but the years before COVID and where we are now, it's more often that we're selling land through that approach than through the portal, outside of specific cases, outside of something that is a higher price point, very much owner focused type stock.
Yeah, so just repeating that in a little bit more bite-sized chunk for everybody. I guess what you're saying is the intermediary. That's the client that you're dealing with on a typical basis. They have their own client who has a specific requirement. So what you're trying to do is you're just trying to use these networks to say, look, I've got this particular kind of product. I think it's going to be suitable in this instance for an NDIS, for example. So you're going to go down that particular channel. Another time it might be good for micro apartments, so you'll send it down that particular channel. Other time it might be good for an investor or an owner occupier. So you just know which channels that this particular block, based on its geography, its demographics, and price points, you know where that really sits. So a block of land is not just a block of land.
That's right. Yeah.
It's
so ultimately
of what you're going to put on it. That's actually the bit that most, I guess, typical real estate agents are missing.
Yeah, and ultimately, we want to do is we want to maximize the exposure. So we're trying to maximize the amount of people that will look at the land, that will have an interest in it for some particular reason. So the ideal scenario is you have something which is going to have appeal to a lot of different people, or it's very unique and will appeal to one particular buyer group, but it's also rare. So those are kind of the two cases where you know you're going to have a good sales campaign. You can really test the limit on price.
Yeah, and in those instances, it's largely what everyone else would seem to be off market. So you've really got a captive audience that they can't go around you. You're the only conduit into the property itself. So if they don't get this one, they don't know where else to go because this sort of stuff's just not listed.
Yeah, that's right. The other thing is that you've got to understand the requirements of the person that you're speaking to. So let's say if you're speaking to a sales BDM at a particular investment builder, now we're in a market where there is starting to be more stock. Think like on a region basis, not just say in a particular suburb. So they're now getting a lot more options to look at. So it's about having a relationship with that person and also understanding why the particular piece of land that you're offering, what its point of difference is, and why they should be pushing that to their particular sales groups or their particular client they have versus what else might be available in the marketplace.
Yeah. So let's talk about that for the moment. So the market that we're in right now. So clearly markets go up and down all the time. And, you know, 18 months ago, we were in a building boom and land was flying out the door. Then I guess a whole bunch of builders going bust and cost of building going up. Now it would appear, at least on the surface to, I guess, the lay people out there, that land just isn't turning over. But you guys are clearly seeing something very different. So what are you seeing in the market right now with regards to, I guess, activity that's happening?
Yeah, so we're starting to see a return of buoyancy to the land market, but it's very specific to the type of land that you have and what constraints are associated with it. So it's specific to a particular price point. So there's a lot of investment interest where they're able to put forward a package under about 650 to 700,000. So we're talking about land that's kind of capping out about 300 or 350,000. We're also seeing at the higher end of pricing, if you have a particular block which is relatively straightforward to build on, so it doesn't have a lot of slope, it's got a good frontage, it's easy to access, a lot of builders would be putting their hand up to build on that particular block. Buyers are returning to that market, that owner-occupier market, which was where it really died. There was times where you could have a really good piece of land and it could be priced well, and there just wasn't any buyers for it. And that was largely to do with the negativity around building, the uncertainty, the fact that builders were saying that it would take 6 to 8 months just to start on site. They couldn't give them fixed prices, these sorts of things. But where we are now, just looking at this year, I'm pretty sure the first quarter of this year was the lowest in a decade for new building approvals. At the end of July, the year-on-year approvals dropped 50% from the previous year. So there's a lot of the pipeline that was kind of built up from home builder and COVID. It's largely been absorbed. Builders that have come through all of that are in a stronger position. And people are now looking for work. So you can go to builders and get a fixed price. You can get guaranteed build times. People are willing to give you quotes up front because they don't have people just throwing deposits at them. So yeah, it's kind of a two-pace market. If you have something which is compromised, it's in a tough position, or it's difficult to build on, then it still struggles. But largely, yeah, anything that's kind of A grade, I would be very bullish in the coming months on that stock.
Yeah, it's a good stock, good location, hardly any constraints. Is always going to sell in any market. But wherever you've got challenges, and as property developers, our job is to solve the problem for the ultimate buyer, and that's really, I guess, one of the things that you guys are specializing in is to say, well, given sites that might have some constraints, you know, what kind of product can we put on there? So we might talk to some of those constraints and that sort of thing and what to do about them a little bit later in our chat. But for now, mate, just, I guess, the builders themselves, I guess there's been a whole bunch of price escalations, builders going broke, time blowouts, all those sorts of things. And you just touched on it before. What I'm seeing is, look, the guys that were not well set up for their business, they're the ones that typically fell over. But the ones that have lasted through this, they are strong and scalable and robust, and they're the ones that are, I guess, going to stand the test of time. So we're probably back to a core set of builders that have really got their shit in the pile, for want of a better word. And now I think the industry will be healthier, given that everyone coming back in is coming back, I guess, at a clean slate.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, at least in the residential space, probably the only risk to builders now, because a lot of the difficulties they had was committing to fixed prices, and then prices just escalating, trade availability just dropping off a cliff, things that were very hard to predict. But we're not seeing any of that anymore. So I would say, if you're doing your due diligence on a builder, I would just be looking at what the number of builds they had were, what they have forecast. If they had a large number of builds and now they don't have a lot in the pipeline, they may be carrying some overhead risk. But more or less, yeah, I think that most of the builders now are in a stronger position.
Yeah. So, okay, when we're starting to looking at selling as land, and most people are very simplistic in their assessment, land is just land is just land, right? But in reality, there's, I guess, the physicality of where it's located. So, is it inner city? Is it towards the edge? There's what does it suit from a use case perspective? There's all the constraints that might actually sit on there. So we're going to deep dive into each one of those elements and go, well, let's see how that might actually impact, I guess, the saleability of that, I guess the kind of product we might put on there, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So let's start with, I guess, physical location. So we've got infill, we've got, I guess, the city edge or the fringe of the city and what they call greenfield developments. I guess those two markets, where are you seeing the differences in those?
So with the infill, there's always a scarcity on infill land, and that's just by nature of the fact that there's only so many properties that will be sold that can be subdivided. You pick any particular suburb that's built out. So you don't need to be worried too much about supply, but the big thing with infill is the constraint. So you're going to have a number of different constraints that can come up because this land hasn't necessarily been designed to be built on in a very easy manner. Whereas when you go to the greenfield locations, fringe and greenfield, you're developing bigger estates, more or less developing bigger estates. So you've
got a
as
clean
part of that
slate.
process.
You've got a clean slate so they can design it well.
That's right. So you're designing for them to be built on simply, if you're doing it correctly. And so more or less when you go to the fringe areas, you need to have an understanding of competition. So what's the future supply like that in that area? What has the absorption rates been in the past? So how many blocks of land typically sell per month or per annum? And when you're trying to come up with prices in that area, so looking at price ceilings as well, because generally the fringe and greenfield are lower price brackets, and the buyers in those locations they call it the mortgage belt. They're more sensitive to rate movements, and there's a particular price ceiling. Once you get above that price ceiling, it can be quite difficult to ultimately sell that piece of land. And you see that if you look at the bigger estates, especially further from the CBDs. If you look at the square meter rates and the size of blocks, it's incredible the rate that square meter rate will drop off versus you take like a 300 square meter block, let's say, versus a 600 square meter block. And even though you have twice the size, you might only be talking another 20 or 25% maximum in what you can sell that block for. So yeah, if you're looking in the infill, you need to understand your competition being existing houses. So existing houses, that's what your buyer is looking at as an alternative. So looking at, okay, if I buy this land and I build versus if I go and buy a brand new house, or if I buy something near new, does that make sense? And you should see some uplift in that building process because there's risk and there's time, and that buyer has to have flexibility on their living situation. They can't just sell their house and move into this one. They have to rent somewhere, which at least in Southeast Queensland is a bit of a nightmare right now. Or they have to be able to afford to stay where they are while their house is being built. So it's really important that when you're an infill, if you're trying to make an assessment of value, you look at the existing house sales and you look at the new house sales and you look at even the development site sales. So if you've bought a simple 1 and 2 subdivision, what else is sold in that area? Because then you can kind of get an idea about what other developers' cost base will be on their blocks. If you go on a fringe, existing house sales really aren't as important as understanding what the price ceilings are in the area, what the number of blocks are likely to be in that area, and also who the developers are in that area too. So you might find if you've got a big tier one developer like a Mirvac or a Stockland or a Lendlease, something like that, what they're going to do is they're going to take a suburb and they're going to put it on the map. So somewhere like Caboolture West right now is a good example. There's a lot of bigger developments in there, so it's getting a lot of media, a lot of attention. They're going to set a price for that area, and you can leverage that if you can come into suburbs like that, sit below their pricing, because you do need to be below, because you're not offering the same. You're not offering the same amenity. You don't have the same marketing budget. You don't have a display village, so you can't be achieving the same price, but you can kind of piggyback off the name that they're going to bring to that suburb.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the other things from an infill perspective, like there's not that much infill land that comes up. So trying to find comparable prices, there's a lot of people that will be buying an old shitter and doing a knockdown and rebuild. So, you know, if somebody's willing to pay something with some intrinsic value and then some extra expense to knock it down, just to get back to vacant land, you've got to factor that into, well, what would clean vacant land be worth right up front? So that's one view of that comparison. And then the other end of it is, as you said, well, if it's actually finished, if it's new or near new, what's that actually selling for? And look at the differential between those two and go, is that enough to actually put a build on based on the demographic of the area, the kind of product that they actually need? So you guys are looking at all of those scenarios to go, in this particular area, this is where we think we can squeeze the lemon a little bit harder.
Yeah, and probably the other thing I'd add to that is we kind of find, especially closer into cities, so built out infill areas, that land buyers aren't as sticky on a suburb, let's say, as a traditional existing house buyer might be. And that's because they have made the decision they want to look at building. So they might have a particular plan in mind, or they might just have this dream that there's a certain house they want to build and it's got to be exactly the way they want it. And for that, they're willing to look across a region. So it does pay also to look at adjacent suburbs or any suburb really that you think a buyer might consider as an alternative to help build that overall picture of the marketplace and what you can likely expect to sell your land for.
Yeah. So that's kind of given us an idea of the where. Now let's have a look at the who. Who are we selling this to? So fundamentally, I'm thinking there's kind of three different markets. There's your owner-occupier, there's your investor of different kinds of product type, and then there's your builder developer who wants to pick up, I guess, a block of land and do a spec build and then flick that on. Have I missed anything out of those three?
No, that's more or less the three different, and then you can break them into subcategories, and they all have different requirements and different ways that they're going to look at that piece of land. So if we talk about owner occupiers, then there's three different groups, but they're all kind of looking for land which is relatively close to registration. So in your subdivision process, you can imagine if you, in a normal market, if you're selling to an owner occupier and you've only just got DA approval, let's say you're still 9 months from titles, let's say it's going to take them another 12 months to build their house. So now you're asking an owner occupier, they're waiting 19 months until they're moving into their new house, which is it's a big thing for an owner occupier to look at that and accept that. So generally that market is wanting something which is either close to, so within 60 days, or registered, close to registration for their land. Many of the owner occupiers are going to be first time builders as well. So what that means is that a month in a week in a house sale is like a month in a land sale, because they have to digest a lot of information about building. What does that involve? There's so many different builders that I can go to. All I hear is that the costs just go up and up. So these are concerns that you have to mitigate, and that can only be done through education. So that's why it can take longer to sell land in that owner-occupier market. And then the other thing would be, I think, as I mentioned before, so that they're going to be considering existing homes as an option. The three different groups are going to be your first home buyer. So the number one constraint of the first home buyer is their budget. generally they've got a budget, and that's the thing that they can't change. There's a lot of other things that they can change, but they can't change what they can afford. So they're more flexible on location, and they're building largely to get into property and make use of the first home buyer grant, the lower stamp duty concessions, and other things that are available to them as a benefit of buying and building a home, as opposed to buying something existing.
And for
Then
those,
you've got your upsizer.
for those reasons, they're the ones that are likely to be at the fringe and the greenfields, because that budget's, that's the constraint. So, when we're looking at the demographics and the price points, well, they're probably going to fit over there.
That's right. Yeah. So your predominant owner occupier is going to be your predominant first home buyer is going to be in those locations. So if you are developing there, that's your owner occupier that you need to consider, that market, and remembering that they are sensitive to rates. So if you're in a market where rates are dropping, generally those places are more buoyant. You see price escalation. If you're in a market where rates are going up, then sort of the opposites happen. And that's what we've seen in the past 12, 15 months, where you had a huge jump in prices, sometimes up to about 50%. And then now it's retracted sort of up to about 30% in pricing, because it's just followed the rates. Your other buyer, so you got your upsizer. So the thing about your upsizer is that they're now looking for their dream house. So they're very picky on location, and a lot of times you need to have a catalyst for them to take action. So yeah, that can be that market can be unsteady, because if you have property that's really has some issues with it, a lot of those people are just going to look at it and pass on it. So yeah, that's understanding that market, you're going to be picky. They're looking for their dream house. It's got to be purpose built, and it's going to be walking them through the education. And then your third owner occupier is your downsizer. And the big thing with downsizers is generally they're wanting to avoid stairs. So if it's a block with a lot of slope, it makes it difficult to do a single story. Whereas flat blocks are a lot more simple for single stories. Downsizers also tend to work in months rather than weeks, so it can be a bit of a slow burn working the downsizer market.
They got more time in their hands, mate. They're probably just happy to have someone to chat to.
Yeah. And again, it comes back to that catalyst for action. So generally they might say they're ready to do something, but when they're leaving a house that there's been a lot of memories in, it can take a while for them to come to terms with that decision.
Yeah, very good. Well,
yep.
Oh, I was going to say, next category is probably our investor market, and different kinds of investors looking for different kinds of things. So two reasons to invest: there's capital growth, and then there's cash flow, right? So where are you seeing that break up with regards to product type that those guys are actually looking for?
Yeah, so with investors, the majority of investors, they're going to be under 1 million, and that's for house and land. So and even so, generally 700k, anything over 700k, it's quite uncommon to find investors in that bracket. Investors are purely numbers driven, so you need to have an angle with your particular land. So what product are you going to put that with? Are you going to put it with a regular house, and is it going to be a house and land with one lease? If that's the case, we're finding the yields would be maybe 4%. So you need to have a good capital growth story associated with that. What's happening in the area? Is it in a growth corridor? Is there a lot of infrastructure planned? A lot of parts of Brisbane, Southeast Queensland, for instance, have a good story right now that you can build around that product. Or is it a yield-based product? So things like rooming, things like dual occupancy, which is where you have two sides, so the dual key or dual occupancy, and you can rent each side out separately. The yield with where the rates are now, you really need to have at least 5.5% yield, but the closer you can get to 8, the better. And then you've got a duplex. So a duplex, if you can if you can do a duplex or get an approval for a duplex, that's something which can certainly be of interest. Challenge there is going to be the cost to build, but generally with the duplex, you're going to end up in that million sort of price range for your package, but you can subdivide after, or you can strata title. So as long as you can show on paper equity uplift and you're achieving that 5.5% yield, typically, yeah, we can find buyers for that particular product. Outside of that, I mean, there's NDIS as well. That's a very specialized product. So largely, we just deal with groups that specialize in that and leave the specifics up to them, but understanding the price points they operate in. It's just tenant driven NDIS. So you need to understand where's the tenant demand, and then work backwards from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are a number of different kind of NDIS products based on their level of disability. I guess that changes the kind of product that actually sits there. So the kind of cost to construct that, you're not going to go unnecessarily building a high physical needs product in an area that has a completely different kind of clientele. So understanding those clientele and where they are, where they're located, that sort of thing in itself is a specialty niche. So hence working with those guys, let them work out where their clients are, where their ultimate clients are.
Yeah, absolutely. If I could, one piece of advice I would give to anyone that wants to go there is start with the provider. I think they're called SILs or something like that. Start with the provider, understand where are your tenants, where do you have the most tenant demand, and then work backwards from there on the numbers. But the key with investors is that your land price is kind of going to be capped maximum 600K, but mostly sub 500K. So if you're doing a development where you're expecting above that, then it's unlikely you'll see an investor as your ultimate purchaser.
Yeah, and probably important again, whilst we did say at the start, we're talking Southeast Queensland markets here. Right this very moment, I'm sitting in Sydney. If anyone's buying land in Sydney for those sorts of prices, good on you.
Maybe in Sydney, yeah.
But what we're finding is it's the Sydney investor that's actually buying stuff in Southeast Queensland because their property's gone up and they've got so much equity on their hands. So mate, that's 2 of our 3 categories of buyers actually dealt with. Now we've got our builder and builder developer, I guess, building a spec home. So tell us a little bit about these guys and what they're looking for.
Yeah, so the builder developer, again, it's all about the numbers for them, but generally they're going to want to see, there's 2 reasons that they would buy, and there's 2 ways that they would buy. So the first is just going to be someone that's looking to buy a house, build on it, sell it, make a profit. Most of the people we deal with, their kind of benchmark is they want to make about 100 grand in profit. Now, remember, they are builders, so they're building at cost. So they can build a lot cheaper than perhaps what, if you or I just went to the builder and asked them for a price. But that's the sort of metric that we found that the builders are working on. The other way that they'll purchase is through what's called a put and call option, which is essentially they're going to say to you, okay, I'll guarantee that I'll buy the land off you at a certain date for a certain price. But generally, what they're trying to do there is secure land for them to ultimately sell to a client that they may have. So this is very typical in more of those fringe and greenfield, where you have a larger supply of land, and it makes sense for, say, a builder early on in your development. You might look to provide a builder with 10 blocks as put and call or something like that, because then they can build a whole sales strategy with a particular sales group or whoever they work with. So that would be probably the most common scenario where we see the put and call purchase, and that's because effectively they're controlling it without owning it in a way where they'll be liable for stamp duty.
Yep. All very good. And I guess whenever we're thinking about those guys, we've got to remember they're trying to make a profit, and so we've got to leave enough meat on the bone for them to actually do that. So as much as we want to squeeze our price as high as we can, there is a cap that if they don't make profit, they're not going to buy off us.
Yeah, that's right. It's because you're infringing greenfield, and sort of where we are now is like we feel people are starting to expect price escalation, you might be dealing with a project that has a 12 to 18 month time frame. So you might find that the numbers that you're talking today, someone would be happy to put and call because their expectation is by the time they're expected to settle on that block, they're going to pick up some uplift, or effectively the values have gotten higher. You might ask, why would you do that? Why would you sell the land at this stage if you expect that there's going to be uplift? Well, simply, it comes down to risk. If you're making money at those numbers, and sometimes there's a lender involved as well that's looking for some pre-sale requirements, then those are kind of two reasons where you might go down that avenue.
Very good. Okay, so now we've dealt with the where and the who's going to buy it. Now let's look at the actual stock itself and the issues and challenges that might sit around it. So the constraints that might be sitting there, because we all want a flat block, but unfortunately, flat block with all the services in the perfect location, but unfortunately that doesn't happen all the time. So what are some of the issues and challenges and the impacts on building costs that you see through that process?
Yeah, okay. So constraints is a big one in the infill. That's probably where it's going to be the most applicable. And like I said before, that's because that land wasn't designed to be something that was very straightforward to build on. These subdivisions were done decades ago, and same with the services. The services were put in decades ago. So that's where you probably need to have a really good handle on what those constraints are. So the typical ones, well, let's establish a baseline. So the baseline is your greenfield or your new estate, which is flat. All the services are in the verge. So at the front of the block, you've got compaction. So the engineers, they're happy to tick off on the slab without what's called putting piering in, those sorts of things. You've got a well-defined building envelope. So you can go to anyone and they can build on that block. So you can go to any project builder, and so those would have the smallest amount of, let's say, site costs. Because when you're building, you've got two inputs. It's basically the house. I used to describe to people, you've got the house that sits in the air with all your inclusions, because they would get the turnkey price, but you've got to take that house and you've got to put it on a block of land, and that's what your site costs are. So how much is it going to cost to put that house on that block of land? So the number one constraint to look at first is slope. I remember when we started, it was like the rule of thumb was about 10K per meter of slope in terms of extra build costs. So I'd say now it's certainly 20 or maybe even more. That's sort of the rule of thumb we work on. But there's once you get over about 2 to 2.5 meters of slope over a building pad, that's fall away from the street. Or once you get more than about 1.5 meters rise, so going up from the street, then you're starting to introduce split slabs or pole construction. So things that project builders don't like doing effectively and will charge a lot for. So that's probably one big thing, is that once you're getting over those levels, you're going to eliminate a lot of those potential project builders, which, if we relate back to the start of the conversation, we said that it's good to utilize all the millions of dollars of promos and marketing and everything that they put forward. So it's going to be a lot more difficult to do that when you've got that level of slope. It also is a lot more difficult for investment builders to work on those blocks, because they're referring a client into this package and they want to know what the costs are before the client buys it. And in a lot of cases, it's just not possible to do that. Or they have to put a huge, let's call it, insurance factor into their price. So yeah, slope can become a real challenge, especially when you're over about 2 meters. The next would be your lot dimensions. So in Queensland, at least, and I think it's reasonably typical across the nation, the standard plans that builders design, and a lot of these are going to be changing because of the NCC changes, but the standard lot widths are 10 meters, 12.5 meters, 14 meters. The way you can find this out, if you go onto any project builder website and if you go into the filters on their plans, you can see often it's got brackets of land widths. So those are like the ideal lot widths. Once you get below 10 meters, certainly possible to build a house, but there's way less off the shelf or standard plans available. And the other thing, once you go to like an odd shape, then you're asking someone to do a custom plan if they're going to maximize the use of that property.
Yeah.
And once you do that, then there's a lot of work up front for that buyer to be confident about buying that block. So then, for instance, if we were selling that, we would suggest spending the money, putting something together initially, at least to provide a concept about what you can do on that block, so that will assist in your sales process. So lot dimensions is a big one, and that's something that's important to know when you get to bigger land subdivisions where you have some flexibility on how you lay out the site. Seeing people just put, say, 4 blocks all together, all 11 meters wide, when they could have done 2 that were 10 meters and 2 that were 12 meters, which would have been a lot more sellable solution, because not only do you have now lots that are optimized for the standard plans, but you also have 2 different price ranges that you can target. So you want to understand that when you have your when you're coming up with different designs on the bigger land subdivisions.
Yeah, and some of the other things, and you touched on it a couple of seconds ago, the National Construction Code bringing in their 7-star energy efficiency rating means that north-south facing blocks are going to be way more attractive in the future than an east-west type block. So not impossible to get you 7 stars on an east-west, but it means that it's going to be more expensive from a build perspective. So that your lot design is going to be super important moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. A few other things tend to be the main ones. So access. So how's the block accessed? And effectively, if it's on a busier road, or if it's got no parking out the front, funnily enough, trades don't like having to walk. So if it's difficult to access, then a lot of builders won't build on it, or they're going to charge a lot. Also, when they're delivering, it can be dangerous if it's on a busy road. I remember we sold a block on a road called Toombul Road once, and which is a very busy road in North Brisbane. And they had to use traffic control, and they shut down a whole lane. And apparently that, there was probably about 1 kilometre of traffic that day. So how is the site accessed? Battle axe as well. Some builders are pretty selective on battle axe blocks, especially given where the service is located, if they're not located right next to the block. Next thing would be easements. Easements, they're becoming very common because they're typically associated with either access or services. So not every easement has the same impact on price. So you need to understand, how is the buyer going to view that easement? A good example I could give is, commonly you will see an easement, which is an access easement for a block positioned behind, so a battle axe block. Effectively, you just need to take that area off the size of land that you're selling, because it has no use to the owner of that block. They can't put anything there. It will just be viewed by the buyers as, if it's a 400 square meter block, but it's got a 50 square meter easement, it's a 350 square meter block. But then you see easements that are just access easements to, say, to get to a manhole or a piece of service. And they don't really have any impact, material impact, because they're generally positioned within the building setback anyway. So they won't have as much impact. So you need to understand what easements are associated and what the associated impact will be to the buyer. Transport noise. So is there noise around the location, anything generating noise? For 2 reasons. Buyers won't like it, firstly, and secondly, when you build, you have to meet a certain construction standard, and if there's a high level of noise, that's going to increase your build costs depending on how much noise there is, and that can be quite substantial.
Yeah, so we're talking about adjacency to main roads, adjacency to rail lines, adjacency to maybe industrial areas, and maybe even flight paths. All of those things are going to impact those. Just picking up on what you said, the impact on cost, I guess with the National Construction Code 7-star energy efficiency rating come in, some of those costs, such as double glazed windows, are going to become, I guess, an inherent part of every build anyway. So the differential was probably quite big now, but as we move forward, that gap is probably going to close up, I'm going to anticipate.
Yeah, absolutely. Generally, what I suggest to people too is when you have the higher category of noise rating. So this will come up in your certification. So there'll be mapping, either at a local or state level, that will effectively say, oh, there's a noise impact on these blocks. Always do a site-specific report, even if you're not required to, because every time we've recommended that the developer do one, it has dropped the rating of that particular site. So you might spend $1,200, $1,500, but if it drops your rating, you're going to save 3, 4, 5 times that in what the cost would have been to build on that particular block. Two more that are big would be a single story. So can you build a single story on the block? And this goes back to what I was saying before. If you can build a single story, now you can target a price point which is about 80 grand less. And a lot of people aren't necessarily after that huge backyard. So like investors, for instance, they're not looking at how much yard space there is. They're just looking at what's the price, what's the yield, and where's it located. So if you have a reasonably flat block that you can get a single story on, that makes a big difference versus, let's say you got the same size block, but it's got so much slope that it would just be prohibitive to build a single story in terms of your extra cost. So that kind of ties back into that slope conversation, whether or not you can get a single story on there. And the last would be, is there a body corporate, which we're finding is more and more common now, with the way that council's wanting to deal with these sort of private laneways or stormwater, dealing with stormwater or other services. Yep. But in general, body corporate will impact your sales prices just from a point of view of the stigma associated with it.
Very good. So, mate, at this point, we've now, where is it located? Who is our ultimate buyer? And I guess the last one, what kind of product we're actually going to put on there, and the constraints that actually sit there. Now we've got to think about, well, what is our exit strategy? So are we going to sell this as land? Are we going to sell it as house and land? Are we going to put packages together? What are some of the permutations that you see and the commonalities that your clients are looking for?
Yeah, so if we talk about exit strategies, let's go through what your options are. So you can sell the land, so either as land or as a put call option. You can sell as a house and land package, and we found that there's a big misconception around what a house and land package is or can be. A lot of people feel that a house and land package means that you take a block, you put a house on there, you package it, and that's what the buyer's buying. But actually, unless outside of certain circumstances, a house and land package is just a marketing tool. It's like when you sell a house and you put furniture in there. So you stage the house so that presents better. The same thing with the house and land package. So what you're doing is you're reframing that conversation with potential buyers from talking about a piece of dirt, which is X big and costs X dollars, to a block, a particular house in a location where if you've packaged correctly, it's going to appeal to people compared to potentially the existing house competition in the area. So it's very similar to that staging the house scenario. And when you sell a house and you stage it, you don't say to the buyer of that house, hey, you can only buy this house if you buy the furniture as well. I think a lot of people, that would become a roadblock for them. So this is effectively what the typical house land package that we do is. We're just taking different houses and we do multiple. So we do single story, we do double story, small and big, change the level of inclusion. The reason being is that part of advertising, we're trying to hit different price points, because there's a lot of remember I said that with the land, we're trying to make a product. So that product is going to, you need to have multiple products because then you can appeal to multiple buyers. You can do a mandatory house and land package, but there needs to be a value add for the buyer in that process. So where we've done that in the past is in an area where there was surplus supply of land, and we took one particular builder, packaged the whole estate, so it was an integrated house and land estate is what we would call it. But the builder was providing a better price because they were doing a volume of builds in that location, which means that they had savings. They could line up their slabs. Only one supervisor, things like only needing 1 or 2 portable toilets. So they make savings, and then they can pass that on to consumer. And what you're doing there is you're kind of trying to create a point of difference to some of the other land that's in the area. So you're doing a lot of thinking already for the buyer. It tends to work best in those first home buyer locations where they are just trying to get in, buy something that meets their budget, where they can see some value, and it's a stepping stone. You can do a house and land package, which is what's called single contract. So a single contract is normally when someone buys land, they buy the land as a contract, and they buy the house or build contract. So it's 2 contract. The reason single contract can be attractive is because the purchaser is only paying a deposit up front, and then they're paying the balance once the house is complete. So it's something which a self-managed super fund might purchase, or a downsizer might purchase if they're sort of risk averse and they don't want to take the risk on building and times and time frames and cost blowouts and these sorts of things. So that is something that you can do, and you can even sell that off the plan as it's building. But what it means is that either you need to find a builder that's willing to fund the build, or you need to fund that build yourself. And the last option that you have is to
just on that one before you move on. If you're selling to a self-managed super fund, it's the only way, because the self-managed super fund is not allowed to borrow in order to develop the land itself. So you have to do it as a single contract. So again, understanding who we're selling it to and what that is, packaging that up in that correct way.
And we're starting to see a big resurgence in single contract sales. And this is because typically these sales are units and townhouses, so they're like higher density. But the construction costs have been prohibitive on a lot of those developments, and the planning constraints of late. So now there's like a shortage of stock. So if you do have a site where you can look at single contract, or even if it's a site where you can have a value add process in your approval. So maybe you can get a duplex approved, maybe you can get villa or terrace homes approved, which is going to be connected to a particular build. So you have to build that. That's where I'd be looking at, kind of mandating that the buyer has to buy what you've designed. Then the last option is you can just build a house and sell it as a brand new house. So you've got a whole range of exit strategies there, and that's something that when you're going into a development, you need to understand what's going to be the best fit for this development, based on the parameters of the development, where it's located, what are the price points that we're targeting, who are the buyers that we're targeting, and you can formulate all that, as part of your sales and marketing strategy.
Very good. So for anyone who is considering putting a house and land package together, what are some, I guess, cheats and guidelines for actually considering how they might actually put that together?
Okay, yeah. So we'll go through. Here's what our guidelines are for creating effective house and land packages. So the first thing is you want to choose the right builder or builders. So this comes back to understanding the constraints of your site and understanding what different builders are looking for. So if you've got something which is suiting a lot of standard plans, doesn't have a lot of constraints, is relatively straightforward to build on, something that your headline project builders like, that's probably going to be one of your better options in terms of the builders that you look at. And this is because they've got, for instance, in Queensland, Plantation Homes did a massive push about sort of last year, and everyone that we were selling land to, at least 50% of them seem to be going to Plantation Homes. So that's about leveraging off that brand intangible that those builders have created with their marketing. But if you've got something which is going to be more complicated, requires retaining. So a lot of project builders actually won't do retaining. They won't do that as part of their process. They'll put that back onto the owner to organise. And a lot of their sales consultants aren't really knowledgeable around the costs involved when you add some of these constraints, like building over a sewer line or dealing with slope or having a split slab. So if you try and use those builders, then ultimately you're going to send that buyer to a sales consultant that's not confident in that product, which when they're not confident, then they add that insurance factor. So basically they're going to tell them prices that are much higher than what other builders that are experienced in that area could do. So you need to choose the right builder. Then you need to know who the person or who your prospective buyers are going to be chatting to. Because just like real estate agents, just like everyone, there's good sales consultants at builders, good BDMs, and there's let's say less effective sales consultants BDMs. So you want to be sending them to someone that's interested in selling that package, selling that block of land for you, not just someone that's interested in chatting to someone that's wanting to build and going to take them to another piece of land or another estate or something like this where they are more suited to, and they might feel that they've got a better chance of winning that client. So yeah, it comes back to controlling the message that you're going with the buyers. Another big thing is choosing plans that are going to appeal to your target demographic. So what we used to find when we were more on the buyer side was that if you had a plan that was, if you had a buyer that liked the plan and you met their budget, then you were probably 80% of the way there to winning the business with that particular buyer. So there's lots of different plans around. You can do single, you can double, you can do 2 living, 3 living, you can do bedroom downstairs. Then you've got your specialty product. So you want to have plans that have appeal to all those different groups. So pick your plan wisely. And offer a range of price points. That was the next point. Offer a range of packages at different price points, because what you're doing there is then you're broadening the net of people that are looking at that. So if you're doing, advertising online or on social media, or if you're cross-selling from another project that you might have, this is something we typically do. So because we get land all over the place, if we see someone that doesn't suit a particular block but suits somewhere else, because you've got those preset price points, you can really quickly filter different prospective buyers. And then the last point would be just doing your homework on building on that block and any particular value add strategies. So understanding what's involved, understanding some blocks, because of the nature of how they're designed, the standard setbacks don't lend themselves to a very good building solution. So in some cases, we've advised that a developer incorporates a plan into their DA, and what that does is it establishes a building envelope which is bigger than would otherwise be the kind of code development, and that just takes the uncertainty away from the buyer. So yeah, just look for any value add solution that you can do during your approval process, because then it's going to give you more options when it comes to selling.
Very good, mate. So all of that's been super interesting. Have we got any final thoughts for anyone, I guess, looking to, be doing subdivisions and wanting to sell as land? Clearly, just selling to Joe Public in that retail market only has a certain amount of reach. So connecting into people like yourselves, where you've got that business-to-business relationship and the conduit into many markets, is going to be advantageous, and a lot of instances that's actually off market. What other benefits are there in working like an organisation like yourself?
Yeah, I think that you want to. It's like any product. Like if you were doing an apartment or a townhouse development, you would be chatting to a range of people at the start, and one of those people would be your marketing team or your sales team, understanding. And this is because you're forced to think about the design in a way of what are we putting to the buyers. So that's the kind of knowledge that you want to be taking into a development when you're doing your due diligence, because there might be something that you missed that's going to make that development work, when otherwise, based on what you're looking at, it's not going to work. So as a developer, I feel like having a good understanding of the different buyer groups that you can be going to, and a good understanding of what is the building process. That's key, very key if you're in the subdivision game, because like I said, land is an input, and you've got to understand what are you going to be pairing with that land, and how is that going to be presented, how you can present that in a way that's going to be unique, in a way that's going to be attractive, in a way that you can maximize your sales outcome.
Yeah, pretty good, mate. A pleasure as always. Now, we run events all the way around the country, and you guys have presented as industry experts a couple of times over the years. So thank you very much for that, and again for today. So anyone who wants to, I guess, go back and look at any of Morgan's previous presentations, you can, I guess, go back as an annual member and look at all of our pre-recordings, or come to our live events as they go live all the way around the country. We run these physically in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide, and we live stream them all at the same time. So I guess great way to actually catch up with industry experts like Morgan and others. So mate, thank you very much for, I guess, the info today. And I guess we'll see you at one of our upcoming meetups. So thank you, mate. Greatly appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. Appreciate your time.
No worries. See you guys.